She was abandoned by her own family, but when a stranger stopped at her door just before the storm hit, everything began to change. What made him stay? And what choice did she make that would shape her future forever? Thank you so much for watching, and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from, and why you're following this. The harsh wind swept across the barren plains of Nebraska. 1878. Martha Wilson stood alone by her family's abandoned farmhouse, clutching a tattered shawl around her thin shoulders. At 42, her once vibrant auburn hair was now streaked with gray, pulled back into a severe bun. The drought had taken everything: their crops, their livestock, and finally, their hope. "They'll send someone back for me," she whispered to herself, though the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. 3 days ago, her son James had loaded his wife and children into their wagon, promising to return once they'd found somewhere to settle. The rest of the family had already departed weeks earlier. "Just a few days, Mother," he'd said. "The children can't take any more. We'll find water, find work, and come back for you." Martha understood. The little ones were suffering, their faces gaunt from hunger. She'd volunteered to stay behind, to watch over what little remained of their homestead. But as the third day dawned with no sign of return, doubt gnawed at her resolve that the water barrel held barely an inch of murky liquid. Her food supplies were down to a small sack of cornmeal and some dried beans. Martha sat on the porch steps, staring at the horizon where the dusty trail disappeared into nothingness. "Lord, give me strength," she prayed, her voice carried away by the wind. The sound came faintly at first, a rhythmic thudding against the hard-packed earth. Martha squinted against the setting sun, making out a lone figure on horseback approaching from the east. Not from the direction her family had gone. As the rider drew closer, Martha reached inside the door for her husband's old shotgun. Travelers were rare these days, and not all had honorable intentions. The horse, a magnificent chestnut mare, slowed to a walk. Its rider, a man perhaps in his 50s with a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, raised his hand in greeting. "Evening, ma'am," he called, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Thomas Blackwood. Might I trouble you for a bit of water for my horse?" Martha hesitated, the gun still half hidden by her skirts. "Don't have much to spare, mister." The man nodded, taking in the abandoned fields, the emptiness around her. "I understand. Been riding through nothing but ghost towns these past few days. Drought's been merciless." Something in his honest eyes made Martha lower the gun slightly. "Your horse can have a drink. Not much more I can offer." As Thomas dismounted, Martha noticed he moved with a slight limp. He led his horse to the water trough and allowed her just enough to wet her mouth. "You're alone here," he said. It wasn't a question. Martha straightened her back. "My family's coming back for me. Just went ahead to find better prospects." Thomas's eyes, kind but knowing, met hers. "When did they leave?" 3 days ago, she answered, then added defensively, "My son James is a man of his word." Thomas nodded, looking at the cloudless sky. "Storm's coming," he said quietly, "not rain dust." "Been watching it build to the west all day." Martha followed his gaze but saw nothing. "How can you tell?" "Spent 30 years on these plains." "You learn to read the signs." He turned back to her. "Ma'am, I don't mean to frighten you, but that storm will hit by morning. No one's traveling through it, not for days." Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "I'll be fine inside." Thomas looked at the farmhouse, noting the broken windows, the sagging roof. "Perhaps. But if you'd permit, I'd feel better making some preparations. I can reinforce those windows, check your roof. No charge. Just wouldn't sit right with me, leaving a lady alone with what's coming." Martha studied him. In another time, she'd have sent him on his way without a second thought. But desperation had a way of changing one's perspective. "I have a shotgun, Mr. Blackwood, and I know how to use it." He smiled slightly. "I'd expect nothing less, Mrs. Wilson, Martha Wilson." "Mrs. Wilson, I give you my word as a gentleman. I mean no harm, just offering help to a neighbor in need." Martha hesitated, then nodded once. "You can sleep in the barn, but I'll be locking my door." "Fair enough," Thomas said, already untying his tools from his saddle. "Let's see about those windows before we lose the light." As the sun disappeared below the horizon, Martha watched Thomas work efficiently, covering the broken windows with canvas from his saddlebags, reinforcing the door, checking the roof for loose shingles. He worked without complaint, despite his limp becoming more pronounced as the evening wore on. When darkness fell completely, Martha lit her last precious candle. "There's some cornmeal," she offered reluctantly. "I can make a small porridge." Thomas shook his head. "Thank you, but I have jerky in my pack. Please, keep your supplies." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package. "In fact, I'd be honored if you'd accept some of mine. Smoked venison. Got it from a trading post 2 days back." The smell of the meat made Martha's stomach growl embarrassingly loud. She hadn't tasted meat in weeks. "Why are you helping me, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked suddenly. "Folks these days are looking out for themselves." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Lost my wife to cholera 5 years ago. Before she passed, she made me promise to never turn my back on someone in need." He handed her the package. "Besides, my mother raised me better than to ride past a lady in distress." That night, Martha slept fitfully, the shotgun beside her bed. Through the walls, she heard Thomas moving in the barn, caring for his horse, preparing for the coming storm. Despite her suspicions, she felt something she hadn't in days, hope that she might survive after all. Thomas had been right about the storm. Martha awoke to an eerie orange glow filtering through the canvas-covered windows. The air felt thick, electric. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch, gasping at the sight before her. A massive wall of dust, at least 100 feet high, loomed on the western horizon. The normally blue sky had turned a sickly yellow-brown. Birds flew frantically eastward, escaping the approaching devastation. "Morning, Mrs. Wilson." Thomas emerged from the barn, carrying a bucket of water. "We've got about 2 hours before it hits." Martha stared at the approaching cloud. "I've never seen anything like it. They're getting worse every year. This one's bigger than most." He set the bucket down. "We need to seal every crack in your house. Any fabric you can spare, sheets, towels, clothing, we'll need it all." They worked side by side throughout the morning. Thomas showed Martha how to wet the fabric and stuff it into the spaces around doors and windows. He repaired the back door that had been hanging loose on its hinges, using tools from his saddlebag. "Were you a carpenter before, whatever you do now?" Martha asked, handing him nails. Thomas smiled slightly. "Rancher, mostly. Had a small spread near Omaha. Did all my own repairs." The smile faded. "Lost it after Eliza died. Couldn't keep up with everything alone." Martha nodded, understanding all too well. Her husband William had died 3 winters ago, leaving her and James to manage everything. They'd held on longer than most, but in the end, the drought had won. "Your son," Thomas said carefully. "He's a good man?" Martha bristled slightly. "The best. Worked this land since he was 12. Wouldn't have left if there was any other choice." Thomas nodded. Didn't mean to imply otherwise. "Just wondering if he knows what he's riding into." Martha's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "Heard talk at the trading post. Conditions westward aren't any better. Towns turning away newcomers. Not enough work, not enough water." He saw her face pale. "But a determined man finds his way. I'm sure your son will manage." As they finished the preparations, the wind began to pick up, carrying the first traces of dust. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the sky darkened further. "We need to get inside now," Thomas said, gathering his tools. "Bring your essentials, we might be sealed in for days." Martha hesitated. "Your horse, already taken care of." "Got her in the back of the barn, away from the worst drafts." Covered her face with a damp cloth. He looked toward the approaching wall. "Nothing more we can do now except wait it out." Inside the house, they lit the oil lamp and sealed the final door. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows, searching for any entry point. The first wave of dust hit with a sound, like pellets against the walls. "Now we wait," Thomas said, sitting at the kitchen table. "Hope you don't mind some company, Mrs. Wilson." In the strange half-light of the dust storm, they shared a meal of cornmeal cakes and Thomas's venison. At first, they ate in silence, but as the hours passed and the storm raged outside, Martha found herself telling this stranger about her life. She told him about William, about their journey west with such high hopes, about the good years when the rain came regular and the soil yielded bounty. She spoke of James, her pride evident in every word, and her 2 daughters who had married and moved to St. Louis years earlier. "They wrote asking us to join them," she admitted. "William wouldn't hear of it. A man doesn't abandon what he's built," he'd say. Thomas nodded. "Sounds like a proud man." "Too proud sometimes." Martha stared into her tin cup of water. Might still be alive if he'd been willing to leave when the first drought hit. As darkness fell outside, though it was hard to tell with the dust blocking all light, Thomas lit a small candle to save the lamp oil. In its flickering light, Martha noticed for the first time a faded photograph he kept in a small frame tied to his saddlebag. "Your wife?" she asked. Thomas nodded, untying it and passing it to her. A beautiful woman with kind eyes smiled back. "Eliza, married 22 years. "She was lovely," Martha said, handing it back. "Do you have children?" A shadow passed over Thomas's face. "A son, Daniel. He's in Denver now. We don't speak much." Martha sensed the pain behind those words and didn't press further. Instead, she asked, "Where are you heading, Mr. Blackwood?" "Thomas, please." He hesitated. "No particular destination. Just following the horizon these days." "That's no way to live," Martha said before she could stop herself. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps not, but it's what I have." The storm intensified overnight. Martha lay awake, listening to the house creak and groan under the assault. Despite the fabric stuffed into every crack, fine dust coated every surface. She could taste it, feel it in her lungs. Thomas slept on the floor by the stove, his saddle as a pillow. Even in sleep, he kept a respectful distance, true to his word. By morning, though the darkness persisted, Martha's worry about her son had grown overwhelming. If the storm extended as far as Thomas suggested, James would be caught in it too, possibly with the children. "Do you think they're safe?" she asked, not needing to specify who. Thomas considered before answering. "If your son has half your good sense, he'd have found shelter when he saw it coming. Folks out here know dust storms. He wouldn't risk the little ones. But if they're delayed even longer, then we make your supplies last," Thomas said firmly. "I've got skills for lean times, Mrs. Wilson. We'll manage." The storm continued through that day and into the next. They rationed water carefully, eating little. Thomas told stories to pass the time, tales of the places he'd seen in his wanderings, of kind people and beautiful landscapes that still existed beyond the drought-stricken plains. On the 3rd morning, Martha awoke to silence. The constant howling of the wind had stopped. She rose quickly, finding Thomas already awake, removing the fabric from one window. Pale sunlight filtered through the dust-covered glass. Outside, the world was transformed. Drifts of dust like brown snow covered everything. The barn was half buried, the well completely covered. "We've got work to do," Thomas said simply. Together they emerged into the eerie stillness. The air still held suspended dust that glittered in the weak sunlight. Everything was coated in a layer of fine brown powder several inches thick. "Well," Martha said urgently, "we need to clear it." They worked side by side, digging through the dust to find the well cover. Martha's arms ached, her lungs burned with each breath, but she didn't stop. Water meant survival. When they finally reached it, Thomas carefully removed the cover. "Thank Providence," he murmured. The dust hadn't penetrated the well itself. Martha sank to her knees in relief. "We have water." Thomas nodded, already moving toward the barn. "Let me check on Sadie." His mare had survived, though she looked miserable, her coat covered in dust despite the protective coverings. Thomas led her out into the open air, gently cleaning her face and eyes. Martha watched him with the animal, noting his tender care. A good man, she decided. Whatever his past, whatever had set him wandering, Thomas Blackwood was a good man. That night, exhausted from clearing paths around the house and barn, they sat on the porch watching the stars emerge from the settling dust. "The road will be impassable for days," Thomas said quietly. "Even when it clears, travel will be slow." Martha nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. If James was trying to return, he faced significant obstacles. She felt tears burning behind her eyes. "They're not coming back, are they?" she whispered. Thomas didn't offer false comfort. "I don't know, Mrs. Wilson, but I do know one thing: you're not alone, not while I'm here." In the quiet that followed, Martha felt something shift inside her. For the first time since watching her family leave, she allowed herself to consider a different future than the one she'd been clinging to. A future where she made her own choices rather than waiting for rescue. "Martha," she said finally. "My name is Martha." A week passed since the dust storm, and still no sign of James or any travelers on the road. Each morning, Martha climbed to the roof of the barn, Thomas insisting on steadying the ladder to scan the horizon. Each evening, she returned disappointed, but increasingly resolved. Life fell into a rhythm. Thomas repaired what he could around the farm, the chicken coop, though the chickens were long gone, the broken fence posts, the loose boards on the porch. Martha tended to her small garden patch that had somehow survived beneath a covering of burlap. They shared meals and stories, careful at first, then with growing ease. "I've been thinking," Thomas said one evening as they sat shelling the handful of peas Martha had salvaged. "The soil here is played out, that's plain to see. But there's good land eastward, near the Missouri River, not claimed yet because folks were all rushing west." Martha's hands stilled. "What are you suggesting?" Thomas looked uncomfortable, choosing his words carefully. "Only that you have options. This place ... He gestured at the barren fields surrounding them. "It's taken more than it's given." "This is my home," Martha said, but the words lacked her usual conviction. "Home is where you make it," Thomas replied gently. "My wandering has taught me that much." Later that night, Martha pulled out the wooden box containing her few treasures: William's pocket watch, her wedding band she'd removed when her fingers grew too thin, a lock of hair from each of her children. Memories of a life that seemed increasingly distant. The next morning, Thomas announced he needed to ride to the nearest trading post for supplies. "It's a full day's ride there and back," he said, saddling Sadie. "I'll return tomorrow evening." Martha felt a flicker of panic. "You're coming back?" Thomas's eyes softened. "I gave you my word, didn't I? We'll see this through together, however it ends." After he rode away, Martha stood watching until horse and rider disappeared into the distance. The house felt emptier than ever. She busied herself with chores, trying to ignore the voice inside that whispered he wouldn't return, that like everyone else, Thomas Blackwood would realize she wasn't worth coming back for. To quiet her mind, Martha did something she hadn't done in months. She retrieved her old journal from the bottom drawer and began to write. She wrote about the drought, about her family's departure, about Thomas's unexpected arrival. As the words flowed, she confronted truths she'd been avoiding. James had a wife and children to protect. Even if he'd intended to return, the dust storm might have changed everything. And perhaps, she admitted painfully, perhaps he had never truly planned to come back. The promise of return might have been easier than a final goodbye. By evening, Martha had reached a decision. If Thomas returned, when he returned, she corrected herself, she would ask about the land eastward. At 42, she was not too old to start again. The following day crawled by. Martha packed a small bundle of essential belongings, then unpacked it, then packed it again. She cleaned the house meticulously, as if preparing it for inspection. By late afternoon, she had worn herself out with nervous energy and sat on the porch steps, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. When the small figure on horseback finally appeared, the sun was setting behind the house, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. Martha stood, shading her eyes, her heart pounding unreasonably fast. Thomas rode slowly, his horse laden with supplies. "Thought you might have decided to move on," Martha said when he dismounted, aiming for a light tone but missing. Thomas looked at her steadily. "I said I'd be back." He unpacked his saddlebags, revealing coffee, sugar, flour, and most precious letters. "Asked about your family at the trading post. These were waiting there." Martha's hands trembled as she took the 3 envelopes, one from each daughter in St. Louis, and one addressed in James's uneven handwriting. She clutched them to her chest, unable to speak. "I'll see to Sadie," Thomas said, giving her privacy. In the fading light, Martha read James's letter first. He had reached a small settlement in western Nebraska before the dust storm hit. They had found shelter, but the conditions were dire. No work, no prospects, just more desperate families competing for dwindling resources. "I'm sorry, Mother," he had written. "We must push on to Colorado. A man there is offering work in the mines. I cannot return for you, now the children are weak, and the journey is too dangerous. I've written to Sarah and Elizabeth. They will send money for your passage to St. Louis. Please go to them. Forgive me." Martha felt oddly calm as she folded the letter. The confirmation of what she had already suspected brought clarity rather than despair. Her daughter's letters contained similar sentiments, concerns for her welfare, offers of a home in St. Louis, gentle admonitions not to be stubborn like their father. Thomas returned from the barn to find Martha sitting peacefully, the letters in her lap. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. "Just news," she replied. "James can't return. They're heading to Colorado." She looked up at him. "My daughters want me in St. Louis," Thomas nodded. "St. Louis is a fine city, growing fast. You'd have family there." Martha studied his weathered face, realizing how much she'd come to rely on his steady presence. "What about that land by the Missouri you mentioned?" Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, surprise, perhaps hope. "Still there, far as I know. Wouldn't be easy starting over. But the rainfall's better, soil's richer. Would you show me?" Martha asked, surprising herself with her directness. "Before I decide on St. Louis, I'd like to see these options you speak of." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "It would mean traveling together. People might talk." Martha laughed, the sound rusty from disuse. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm a widow of a certain age with gray in my hair. You're a gentleman who sleeps in the barn. Let them talk." The ghost of a smile crossed Thomas's face. "When would you want to leave?" Martha looked around at the homestead, the place where she had loved and lost, suffered and endured. "Nothing holding me here now. Tomorrow, if you're willing." That night, Martha wrote replies to her daughters, explaining her decision to explore other options before committing to St. Louis. She wrote to James as well, releasing him from his promise to return, wishing him success in Colorado. She did not mention Thomas by name, saying only that she had found help and would be fine. As she sealed the letters, Martha realized she felt lighter than she had in years. Tomorrow would bring uncertainty, but also possibility, a road leading somewhere other than the gradual decline she'd been facing. In the morning, Thomas helped her secure the house as best they could. Martha took only what would fit in a small trunk that could be strapped to Sadie's back. Her wedding quilt, a few clothes, William's watch, her journal, and the letters from her children. "The rest is just things," she said, closing the front door without locking it. Who would come here now, to this abandoned place? Thomas helped her mount Sadie, then climbed up behind her. Martha tensed momentarily at the unfamiliar closeness, then relaxed. They would need to share the horse until they could purchase another at the next sizable town. "Ready?" Thomas asked, his voice close to her ear. Martha took one last look at the farmhouse, the memories it contained rising up like the dust that still coated everything. For a moment, doubt clouded her resolve. "We can stay if you're not certain," Thomas said, sensing her hesitation. "No shame in that." Martha shook her head. "I'm ready." She straightened her back, facing eastward. "Let's find that good land you promised." As they rode away, Martha didn't look back again. The past lay in that direction. Ahead lay whatever future she chose to make, not as someone left behind, but as someone moving forward of her own accord. The journey eastward took longer than expected. Spring rains had turned dirt roads to mud, forcing detours and slow progress. Martha and Thomas traveled through small towns barely clinging to existence, past abandoned farms that mirrored the one she'd left behind. They shared Sadie for the first week until they reached a trading post where Thomas bartered his fine rifle for a sturdy bay gelding. "His name's Copper," the trader had said, handing over the reins. "Gentle disposition, but plenty of stamina." Martha had taken to Copper immediately, appreciating her newfound independence in travel. Though they rode side by side, the separate mounts gave her space to think, to absorb the changing landscape. As they moved eastward by the third week, the land began to transform. The barren browns gave way to hints of green. Streams appeared more frequently, and the air felt different, heavier with moisture, alive with possibility. "We're getting close," Thomas said one evening as they made camp near a small creek. "Another 3 days should bring us to the area I mentioned." Martha nodded, trying to contain her anticipation. She'd changed during their journey, shedding layers of resignation like an old coat. The woman who had waited passively for rescue was gone. In her place was someone who studied maps by firelight, who asked questions about soil conditions and rainfall patterns, who planned. "Do you think there will be a town nearby?" she asked, stirring their supper of rabbit stew. Thomas had proven himself an excellent hunter, despite the loss of his rifle. "Small settlement about 10 miles from the parcels I have in mind," Thomas replied. "Nothing fancy, but they've got a general store, blacksmith, even a small school." Martha smiled at the mention of a school. "That's promising. Shows folks are putting down roots, planning for children to grow up there." Thomas nodded, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Been thinking about that myself lately. Roots." The simple statement hung between them, full of unspoken meaning. Throughout their journey, a careful friendship had evolved, built on mutual respect and shared hardship. Neither had put words to what might come next after they reached their destination. "Thomas," Martha began hesitantly, "when we find this land, what will you do?" He poked at the fire, sending sparks upward. "Haven't thought that far ahead. Been wandering so long, it's become a habit." "But you don't want to wander forever," Martha observed. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "No," he finally said, "I don't." The next morning brought steady rain, forcing them to take shelter in an abandoned barn. They sat in companionable silence, watching the downpour through the open door. Martha wrote in her journal while Thomas repaired a tear in his saddle. "I've been thinking about what you asked," he said suddenly. "About what comes next." Martha looked up, waiting. "I could help you get settled. Build a small cabin before winter comes. Clear some land for planting next spring." He kept his eyes on his work. "If you'd want that." "And then?" Martha asked, her heart beating faster. Thomas finally met her gaze. "And then, if you were amenable, perhaps I might build a cabin of my own, neighboring your property." Martha felt warmth spread through her chest. "Just neighbors?" A faint smile touched Thomas's lips. "To start, proper and respectable. Give folks time to get used to us. And after that?" Martha pressed gently. "After that?" Thomas set aside his work. "After that, Martha Wilson, I would hope to court you properly. If you were willing." Martha closed her journal, considering his words. At 42, she had not expected to contemplate courtship again. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. "I might be willing," she said carefully, "in time." Thomas's smile deepened. "Time is something I'm happy to give. We've both learned patience the hard way." The rain continued through the day, a gentle cleansing that seemed to wash away the last of the dust and doubt they'd carried from the west. By evening, when the clouds finally broke, a double rainbow arched across the sky. "A good omen, Thomas." said, standing beside Martha in the barn doorway. "Do you believe in such things?" she asked. "Wasn't sure I believed in much of anything before I found you," he replied honestly. "Now I'm reconsidering." 2 days later, they crested a gentle hill, and Thomas reined Sadie to a halt. "There," he said, pointing to the valley below. "That's it." Martha's breath caught. The land spread before them in a patchwork of meadows and woods, a small river cutting through its heart. Even from this distance, she could see the rich darkness of the soil where the spring floods had receded. "It's beautiful," she whispered Dot. They made their way down to the valley floor, riding slowly along the riverbank. Thomas pointed out landmarks, explaining which parcels were likely unclaimed, where the best building sites might be. "The settlement, Riverside, they call it, is just beyond that stand of oaks," he said. "We can inquire there about claiming procedures." Martha nodded, but her attention was captured by a small clearing near a bend in the river. Wildflowers dotted the grass, and a natural shelf of rock created a perfect building site, elevated enough to stay dry during spring floods. "There," she said decisively. "That's where I want to be." Thomas studied the spot and nodded approvingly. "Good eye. Southern exposure for your garden. Protected from the north wind by those trees. Close to water, but not too close." They dismounted, leading the horses to drink from the river. Martha removed her boots and waded ankle-deep into the cool water, feeling the smooth stones beneath. Her feet, after so many months of dust and drought, the abundance of water seemed miraculous. "I can see it," she said, looking back at the clearing. "A cabin there, with a proper stone chimney. A garden here by the water. Maybe some chickens to start, then a cow when we can manage it." Thomas stood on the bank, watching her with a tender expression. "We?" Martha felt a blush rise to her cheeks. I know what you meant," he said gently. "And I like the sound of it." They spent the remainder of the day exploring the area, marking boundaries, making plans. By sunset, they had decided on the best location for Martha's cabin, and a separate smaller structure for Thomas, a respectable distance away but within easy calling range. That night, camping in the clearing that would become Martha's homestead, they sat by the fire mapping out the months ahead. "We'll need to file claims at the land office," Thomas said. "Then start cutting logs for the cabin before the summer heat makes it unbearable. I can plant a late garden," Martha added. "Just enough to supplement what we can buy or hunt. Then next spring, we can really begin." The ease with which they discussed their shared future felt both natural and surprising. Two strangers thrown together by circumstance, now planning a life side by side. "Martha," Thomas said after a comfortable silence, "there's something I should tell you." "About my son," she waited, sensing his discomfort. "The reason we don't speak. After Eliza died, I lost myself for a time. Drinking, mostly. Said things I can't take back. Daniel tried to help, but I pushed him away." Thomas stared into the fire. "By the time I came to my senses, he'd moved on with his life. Has a family in Denver now. Have you tried to reconcile?" Martha asked gently. "Wrote letters. They come back unopened." Thomas's voice was rough with regret. "Just wanted you to know. I'm not the perfect man you might think." Martha reached across the space between them, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I've never looked for perfection, Thomas. Just honesty and kindness. You've shown me both." His fingers tightened around hers. "Perhaps someday we might try to find him, together." "I'd like that," Martha said softly. In the morning, they rode into Riverside, a small but thriving settlement of about 30 buildings. The locals regarded them with curious but friendly interest. Newcomers were still welcome here, unlike in the overcrowded Western Territories. At the general store, which also served as the post office, Martha mailed her latest letters to her daughters, updating them on her plans. She did not ask for the money they'd offered to send to St. Louis. Instead, she withdrew her small savings from the bank in her former town, which Thomas had helped her transfer through a banker's draft. "Enough to file the claims and get basic supplies," she said as they left the store, a list of needed items in hand. "The rest will come through hard work And neighborly help, Thomas added with a smile. The storekeeper says there's a barn raising. Tradition here. Help your neighbor build, and they'll help you in turn. They spent the day completing the necessary paperwork at the land office, securing adjacent 40-acre parcels. The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, stamped their claims with an official seal. Congratulations, Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Blackwood. You're now landowners in Riverside County. As they walked back to their horses, property deeds carefully stored in Thomas's saddlebag, Martha felt a profound sense of rightness. The path that had brought her here, the drought, her family's departure, Thomas's timely arrival seemed less like random tragedy and more like necessary steps toward this new beginning. No regrets? Thomas asked, helping her mount Copper. Martha looked back at the small town, then out toward their land waiting in the distance. Not one, she said firmly. They rode home, for it was already home in her mind as the afternoon sun bathed the valley in golden light. Tomorrow would bring the first day of building, of creating rather than merely surviving. There would be challenges ahead, hard work and setbacks, but for the first time in years, Martha faced the future with genuine hope. As they reached the clearing by the river, Thomas dismounted and helped Martha down from her horse, his hands lingering slightly at her waist. Welcome home, Martha Wilson, he said softly. Martha looked up at the man who had stopped for a stranger in need, who had stayed when others had gone, who had shown her a path forward when she thought all roads closed. Welcome home, Thomas Blackwood, she replied, and in those simple words was a promise of all that might come.